Welcome to The Beat. I'm Melissa Murray in for Ari Melber. We begin today with bracing warnings about Donald Trump's assault on constitutional limits and a sitting Supreme Court justice making a rare public statement about the impact on the judiciary. Without directly naming Trump, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson appeared to denounce the administration's repeated attacks on judges. As she put it to an audience of sitting federal judges and lawyers last night, Jackson said, quote, "The attacks are not random. They seem designed to intimidate those of us who serve in this critical capacity, and they ultimately risk undermining our Constitution and the rule of law." I can report that I was at that event last night, and the crowd was keenly focused on the justice's words. Jackson had been slated to give brief remarks before settling into a longer conversation with a sitting judge about her recent memoir. She wound up speaking for a little over a quarter of an hour about the attacks on the judiciary before pivoting to that conversation about her memoir. At the end of the evening, the crowd gave Jackson a standing ovation. On the same night that Justice Jackson made those comments, Donald Trump was in Alabama, and he had this to say.
The courts are trying to stop me from doing the job that I was elected to do. But they have to let us do the job that the voters want us to do. Judges are interfering, supposedly based on due process.
Meanwhile, this morning, Trump opened a new front on a different perceived enemy with a legally dubious threat to enlist the IRS in his crusade against Harvard University. Trump vowed he will be, quote, taking away Harvard's tax-exempt status. As the Times reports, quote, federal law prohibits the president from directing the IRS to conduct tax investigations. At this hour, it is unclear if the IRS will follow Trump's directive. Today, Harvard called that move, quote, unlawful. But let's step back and think about the bigger picture. This week, the New York Times reporting declared Donald Trump's, quote, assault on legal constraints as unlike anything the United States has experienced. And legal experts from across the ideological spectrum denounced the president's increasingly authoritarian tactics, including using the power of the presidency to attack perceived enemies. To discuss all of this, joining me now is Professor Deborah Archer, ACLU president and a law professor at New York University. Deborah is also the author of a brand new book, Dividing Lines: How Transportation Infrastructure Reinforces Racial Inequality. Also at the table with us is Molly Jong-Fast, special correspondent with Vanity Fair and an MSNBC political contributor. Deborah, let's start off with Justice Jackson's remarks last night. How unusual is it to have a sitting member of the court speak so frankly about the state of the judiciary and the interaction between the administration and the judiciary?
Yeah. It is unusual. We've seen it a couple of times recently with this administration. What I think she did was really important, to use her platform to speak to something that we've been seeing and documenting, and that is this administration taking steps to bring the legal system underneath the president's thumb. And that undermines the ability to hold him to account, to protect the rule of law. We're seeing him do that by challenging the integrity of folks on both sides of the bench. So he has challenged law firms who have brought cases that he doesn't agree with, nonprofits, and he has called out justices and judges by name.
So Deborah recently alluded to the idea that other judges have talked about this. Molly, we know that Chief Justice John Roberts issued a very brief statement a few weeks ago. This, I think, was a little bit more elaborate in terms of the statement. She referenced Alexander Hamilton's quote that if we lose an independent judiciary, then we've lost the Constitution. How important, Molly, was it for her to say this? And does it resonate more than the Chief Justice's very brief statement from a few weeks ago?
Well, I think all of what the Supreme Court is doing is resonating. And because we see this because Donald Trump talked about due process, right? And the due process decision was a 9-0. And I think that, right, there have been a couple decisions around this, but there was one that was actually, I think there were two that were 9-0. So that has clearly, he's sort of seen that. He understands that. And I think it's important to remember, he sees polling. He knows what's happening. He knows what he's doing is not popular. And I think the people who we've seen stand up, we've seen Jackson stand up, and we've also seen Harris too. Both say that these are the guardrails. We need them. Yet again, we're seeing Black women stand up, right, and say, what no one else is sort of brave enough to say, which is that we are at a very perilous moment in American democracy. And I think that is what she's saying. And she's saying it because she sees how perilous this is.
Right. So, in addition to Ketanji Brown Jackson, the Chief Justice, and Kamala Harris, we also heard something from retired Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer, who said, quote, "It's quite possible that high-ranking officials in the Trump administration, including Marco Rubio, Kristi Noem, and Pam Bondi, might be held in criminal contempt because of their refusal to comply with court orders on the deportation issue." Deborah, is this likely? What are the different constraints here in terms of having the courts hold the administration accountable through contempt proceedings?
There are lots of ways to hold the administrative accountable, and that is one of them. It's something that normally would be done by the Department of Justice, but under this administration,
Unlikely.
where the president has exercised complete control to direct the Department of Justice, it's unlikely that's going to happen. But a court could appoint an independent attorney to act in that role. But still, the president has powers that might allow him to get around that as well. He could pardon the members of his administration. But it is important to remember that there still are checks and balances on folks within his administration.
So Deborah raises a good point. This can obviously be checked by the administration in various ways. The DOJ can refuse to go forward with any efforts on criminal contempt proceedings. The president might be able to pardon someone who is criminally convicted of contempt. What about other kinds of constraints? Whether it is the court of public opinion, maybe Congress gets off the couch at some point. Molly, what are the other avenues here to hold this administration accountable, especially in light of what we've seen over the last week in terms of the president's dismal polling numbers?
So what we historically thought was from Trump 1.0 was that in Trump's first administration, when he crashed the markets, which he did, there was a pushback and he was like, I don't want to lose my friend's money, right? He had this immediate sort of reaction. This time, he has not had the same kind of reaction. But with the bond markets, when he saw the bond markets were really freaking out, when he saw that he was enacting what's something that could end up being a dollar flight, which would make all of our debt more expensive and would change really the way we live in many meaningful ways. I think when he saw that, he understood it, and that was a guardrail. So I would say there are maybe three, right? The judiciary, the bond market, and what is left of the free press.
All right, so money talk seems to be a theme here. Molly, let's pivot to the story about Harvard. I want to run some tape from a debate that broke out last night actually today on CNBC. So take a listen.
Because maybe they can put enough leverage to get them to so many other universities voluntarily complied. Harvard's fighting
voluntarily. I mean, this is a shakedown.
Okay, whatever you want to call it.
Let's not say it's nothing has been voluntary. It's like the whole thing is a shakedown.
Could be ends justify the means.
The ends justify the means.
No, the
ends do not justify the means. It is impossible. At some level, you have to believe it. Democracy is about a process. It is.
Okay, Molly, that was Aaron Ross Sorkin saying democracy is about a process. In what way can we extrapolate this from Harvard? Is this really about a single university, or is there something larger here? Is Aaron Ross Sorkin right that democracy itself is on the line?
Oh, 100%. First of all, this administration is using anti-Semitism as a cloak, right? This is not about anti-Semitism. If they want to fight anti-Semitism, there are a lot of things they can do, and that would be great. And nobody wants anti-Semitism. It's bad. I'm Jewish. We don't like it. It's terrible. That said, that's not what this is about. And we all know this is about Harvard bending the knee. This is about Harvard becoming a captured institution the way Columbia has. And what Harvard has smartly realized is that the courts will protect them in a way that Trump won't. When you're a captured institution, the way Columbia is, you are at the mercy of Donald Trump. And we see this with the law firms that have given up. They are, Trump can change his mind at any time. In many ways, Harvard is better off because they have the law. And I think that's a really important point. And 100%, this is not about anti-Semitism. This is about capturing institutions. It's about making sure that they don't express, do the science, do the things that Donald Trump doesn't like.
What's your take on this, Deborah, as someone within a university, the threat to revoke Harvard's tax-exempt status? Why Harvard? Why this moment?
I agree with what Molly has said. This is about democracy. It is about an attack on all of the institutions that form a free society. It is because he disagrees with things that Harvard's teaching.
These
with
are engines of
opinions.
dissent, and he's trying to shut them down.
And trying to shut them down, trying to shut down education that he doesn't agree with, that he may find distasteful. And it violates the First Amendment. Harvard has First Amendment rights. The students there have First Amendment rights, and it's in violation of those rights.
So, Molly, the Supreme Court rebukes are rare. The stronger resistance from the university may be rarer still. What do you see going forward? Are more people going to stand up to this administration?
Yes. I think they absolutely are. And I think Harvard, it was so important that they did it. And the way they did it was perfect. And, they were advised by Stephen Levitsky, who is an expert in authoritarianism. I mean, they just did this exactly right. And we've seen other universities join them. We've seen Michael Roth from Wesleyan, who has been just a leader at this. And look, this is a moment when we have to be brave. But the good news is the law is on our side and the public polling is on our side, right? There were polls last week. Donald Trump, the word that people used was chaotic and that he had taken too much power.
So in the face of that chaos, Justice Jackson called for courage, wise words. Professor Deborah Archer, thank you. Molly, you are sticking around, but this is great to kick us off. Coming up, a top economist on why the Trump tariffs could be a big buzzkill for Christmas and July 4th. Plus, our live interview with a state attorney general who is drawing a line in the sand against Trump's attacks on the rule of law. But first, there are new alarms over press freedom, sparked by Trump's push to strip funding from NPR and PBS, the home of Sesame Street and Big Bird.
I know I like you, Snap.
And I like you, Bird.
Turning now to Donald Trump's escalating attacks on the press. Last night, Trump signed an executive order to eliminate federal funding for the public media institutions PBS and NPR. As the New York Times notes, the immediate effect of this order is as now unclear. That's because both PBS and NPR are funded by Congress, and the organizations receive their money 2 years in advance, and that is by design, to insulate them from political maneuverings just like this. In a statement today, PBS's CEO called the executive order, quote, blatantly unlawful, and slammed Trump for trying to cut children's programming like Sesame Street.
I would not rule out the possibility that we would pursue litigation. Look, for more than 50 years, we have been serving our member stations. Many people rely on us for our children's programming, and if for no other reason, that's a powerful argument for funding. Half the children in this country are not enrolled in formal pre-K, but we are here.
All of this comes amidst reports that press freedom in the United States has reached an historic low. The World Press Freedom Index, which rates countries on the degree of freedom that journalists and news organizations experience, downgraded the United States. According to the index, the American press is now on a level with developing countries like Gambia, Uruguay, and Sierra Leone. And in the face of Trump's attacks, some media companies are falling in line, with new revelations this week that owner of Paramount, CBS's parent company, asking 60 Minutes producers to delay sensitive stories about Trump because of a pending merger that will require government approval. As reported last week, 60 Minutes' longtime executive producer recently resigned, citing encroachments on journalistic independence. All of these are troubling developments as journalists fight to preserve free speech and the integrity of the press. Joining me now to discuss all of this is Molly Jong-Fast, who's back at the table, and joining us now is Democratic strategist Aisha Mills. So Aisha, let me start with you. What's your reaction to all of this, like these attacks on the press and the dwindling freedom of the press in the United States?
It's the same as my my reaction to all the attacks, right? I think all of our heads are spinning right now because this is fascism 101. What we're seeing happening is an attempt, Donald Trump is attempting to literally control the airways, to kill free speech, to take over the press, so that Americans are only able to get the messages that he and his cronies who have bought up public radio and all the radio stations, in rural areas, the only thing that we're going to hear is what they want us to hear. And so this idea of taking, attacking the freedom of speech, attacking these independent media outlets and trying to get people to believe that it's quote unquote fake news and to dissuade them from, really buying into the truth. The other piece of that is to get a Sinclair Broadcasting Group or others to continue to gobble up these very small market networks so that they're creating a whole monopoly on what Americans are actually able to hear.
This is part of the story that I don't think a lot of people understand, but over the last 10 years, these smaller news outlets in smaller areas around the country have been gobbled up by large conglomerates, often right-wing conglomerates like Sinclair, and they're controlling news in those small outlets. And this relates to what's happening at the White House, Molly. We've seen that the White House is trying to sideline traditional news outlets like the AP. But this week, we learned that Press Secretary Leavitt is holding special briefings with MAGA influencers. So tell me more.
Those were amazing. You should watch them because they're comic gold. Look, this is the Viktor Orban playbook, right? You go after the universities, then you go after the media. The good news here is that none of this is legal, right? The courts are not going to go for this. And so here's the thing. You can obey in advance. Like you can be CBS, right? The CBS Sherry Redstone. You can say, we're just going to, or you can do what will win, which is doing the right thing, continuing on, knowing that the courts have your back, knowing that public opinion is not with this guy. There is no reason to do any of this. Like you are protected. It's the First Amendment for a reason. And we are a huge country. We are not a tiny dictatorship. And people need to be brave and stand up.
Aisha, Molly just mentioned CBS. Let's talk about 60 Minutes for a minute. We mentioned it briefly in the introduction. Yesterday, 60 Minutes was nominated for an Emmy, and it was nominated for outstanding editing of their interview with then candidate Kamala Harris. We are all laughing because this is incredibly ironic because this very same interview is the interview over which Donald Trump sued CBS complaining about the editing. So can you say more? What's going on here? If the editing was this bad that it prompted a lawsuit, how is it now Emmy worthy?
I mean, look, there is the industry, right? The media industry. And I kind of don't want to go too far in the weeds of assessing what is worthy of an Emmy or what isn't, right? This network has a lot of Emmys, which is great. I think at the end of the day, the people who are watching this, regular Americans, are like, why does this apply to me? I watch MSNBC to get my news and I believe what I hear, or I listen to NPR radio when I'm in my car and I believe what I hear. The real issue at play here is when the president of the United States is trying to control and censor and attack actual facts, actual information, actual reporting. That's why we all need to be concerned. And the other thing that I would just offer on this is that these public radio networks and this media, that's how people are getting their information about disaster relief. When there's a hurricane, when there's a fire, when there's a flood, a lot of times those are the outlets that folks in rural communities are turning to get their information around preparedness. And so this is a serious business. This isn't just, entertainment and whether he likes this reality show or the other one. This is serious consequences of lack of information getting through and filtering through that helps people in their day-to-day lives.
And the president using the bully pulpit of the presidency to make this happen. Molly, if you are not a journalist who is a MAGA influencer, what advice would you give them for getting along with this administration or even just working around this administration right now? What can journalists do?
So I actually think that the White House press corps could do more. They could negotiate collectively. That's why they exist. To set up a group to say, if you're going to punish the Associated Press for not calling it the Gulf of America, then you're not going to have normal reporters either. Like, that's the thing. The MAGA influencers, they're sneaking them in. But if you look at who's really in the briefing, there are normal reporters in there. I was actually looking and watching the press briefings. So the question is, how much will the White House Correspondents Association let this White House get away with.
So this is the same playbook that the universities are now doing. So Columbia was out on their own. Harvard decided to step up, and then all of these other universities coalesced around Harvard. Maybe we should just start with the coalescing playbook from the beginning and have the press come together.
Well, Ann Applebaum, who was on before this, who's really an expert on authoritarianism, says that's the only way to do it, that you have to be a collective. So if you want the mainstream media, and maybe you don't, but I think Trump does because he sat with The Atlantic and he sat with Time Magazine. If you want the mainstream media, you're going to have to bargain collectively.
So, Ayesha, for years, you have covered and advocated for those who are among the most marginalized groups in society. How does the constrictions on the press affect those communities who are perhaps more vulnerable?
I think two things are happening. One, the reason that we get to a place, for example, of having a marriage equality and a LGBTQ rights is because we spent decades through the media, be that, Hollywood representations of queer people or through news and reporting and actual storytelling, making sure that there were human stories being told about the truth of who our neighbors were with dignity and respect. The fact that that may dry up, just honest storytelling about humans means that our neighbors won't know us for who we really are. And that's really important when it comes down to voting on your opinion about whether someone should exist or should matter. The good news, I think, is that because there's a democratization of information access, right, with social media, and you've got TikTok, and you've got Instagram, and you've got so many influencers out there with millions of followers who happen to be diverse people that are out there representing and reflecting various communities. And I think that that is at least some positive there, that more people are getting to know us, just not in mainstream media.
All right, so lots of different places you can go, but these stories definitely matter. Molly Jong-Fast, Ayesha Mills, thank you for joining us. It's a great way to kick this off. Later in the show, how Trump's so-called Liberation Day tariffs are threatening real-life Independence Day fireworks, and a whole lot more. Also ahead, I'll get into the growing anti-Trump push from the streets to the courts. We have a Democratic Attorney General who is suing the Trump administration. Plus, there's new heat on Trump after perhaps the single most bruising political week that he's faced, just 100 days into his second term. That's all up after the break. It has been an absolutely brutal week for Donald Trump as he marked the 100 days milestone of his second term. There have been scandals, low approval ratings, and a shrinking economy all have dominated the headlines.
The spotlight on how destructive they say Trump's first 100 days in office have been.
His approval crashing already to 39%. The worst in 80 years.
The U.S. economy shrinking for the first time in 3 years.
We cannot continue living like this. 4 months has been a nightmare.
Mike Waltz, the national security advisor, was being shown the door. But as he went out one door, he went in another one, and that was the nomination to be the UN ambassador.
The departure of the national security advisor, Mike Waltz, was the first major personnel shakeup for this Trump administration. And predictably, late-night comics had a field day.
Finally, a member of the Trump administration faces lasting consequences that lasted 3.5 hours.
Well, he's not fired, but he was removed from the group chat. What a strong message that is. We can't trust you to keep our secrets, but go cavort freely with representatives from every country in the world.
Thank you, Mike. Now get the out of here.
Late-night comics are mocking Trump, but for many Americans, this is no laughing matter. Trump's approval rating is underwater in each and every poll. And week after week, Americans keep showing up in huge numbers to protest his agenda. Joining me now to discuss all of this is Eugene Daniels, MSNBC's senior Washington correspondent and the new co-host of The Weekend, which debuts tomorrow. Eugene, what's the mood in the Trump White House? Has anything shifted with all of these new polling numbers?
That whole, litany of socks that we just saw stressed me out. And probably everybody watching. Inside the Trump White House, I think what you're hearing over and over and over again is to stay focused, right? That is the kind of way that they like to operate, doubling down, tripling down. That's how Donald Trump has always worked. I was talking to someone just yesterday. And I was like, the polls are bad, and all the polls are bad, so bad that Stephen Miller is telling, Fox News to fire their pollster while he's on Fox News during an interview. And
I think we're losing Eugene a little bit.
Yeah, the
but
polls
there
now
you
we
are.
couldn't believe it.
Sorry about that, Eugene. I think we lost
The
you.
polls that they believe in. How we doing? Are we working?
You're
Is
there.
it working?
Yeah, now
Okay,
we're here.
we're good. Zoom's still messing up for all these years later. But they believe in the polls that they believe in, right? The polls that are good for them. That's how they kind of have always operated. And Donald Trump has always done a very good job convincing himself and the people around him to operate that exact same way. So much so that there's a little bit of a delusional situation happening where it is very clear that the American people are not really buying what Donald Trump is selling. They have been waiting for a long time for him, at this point, more than 100 days, to focus on the economy, right? The reason many people voted for him, and they're not really doing it in a serious way in this White House.
So I get the point, Eugene, that it is business as usual at the White House, but it's not business as usual with these polls. Like, these polls are markedly worse than where he was polling at this point in his first administration. So is there no sense of nervousness, or maybe we got the mood wrong, or maybe we don't have the mandate we think we have behind the scenes at the White House?
No, because when you talk to the people that are at the top talking, that actually talk to Donald Trump, those folks are true believers, right? They don't actually feel like these polls are bad, or more importantly, what they're hearing from the Trump base, which is who they're actually listening to, right? When you look at where he is with the Trump base, he's exactly where he has been, right? They still like him as much as they have. We talked to a bunch of our colleagues who were at the rally this week, and what you heard from the Trump folks there is like, it hurts, but it's going to be okay. He promised us it's going to be okay. We're going to figure it out. The prices are going to be higher for a little bit, and then they're going to come crashing down. It's going to be jokes on you, mainstream media, right? And so that is kind of where their heads are. Now, if you start to see a real change within the MAGA movement, then things might, feel differently in the White House, but that's not the case yet.
Let's talk a little bit about the personnel shift. So the first Trump administration was marked by internal turmoil. Mike Walls is just the first departure from the administration in the second term. But many Democrats are arguing that Pete Hegseth should also be relieved of his post at the Department of Defense. Let's hear some sound from Senator Blumenthal on this.
I think there has to be accountability for the mistakes and the errors that have been made, but I think the Secretary of Defense ought to bear that responsibility.
I think they're holding the wrong guy accountable.
It's the responsibility, but I also think Pete Hegseth needs to be fired as well.
Frankly, I think the next move would be Hegseth. He's not suited for the job.
Where does this go? Where do you see this playing out for Pete Hegseth? It seems the knives are out for him on Capitol Hill.
Yeah, the Trump folks are kind of very clear-eyed about how in that first term, really in that first year, every week there was someone getting fired. So much so in DC, you could get free meals and free drinks if someone was fired on Friday, right? That was how often it was happening. And so they're very cognizant of that. They didn't like that. Donald Trump did not like that narrative that was out there. See, even Mike Waltz being removed, he moved into ambassador, right, to the United Nations.
It's a promotion.
And it's a promotion, they say. It's a promotion. I think with Hegseth, his biggest problem is that he hasn't looked like a fighter to Donald Trump, right? And that's why you saw him, this week and last week, kind of going on Fox News quite a bit and kind of fighting. You know what I mean? Fighting back, because that is what Donald Trump wanted to see. So far, it seems like he is happy with the way that Pete Hegseth has defended himself and has talked about, I'm not going anywhere. I'm here for the war fighters, et cetera, et cetera. But again, Donald Trump, when he gets embarrassed, that's when he gets rid of people. That is when, after a while, when he starts seeing coverage after coverage about how he is losing something, that's when he gets pissed. And then all of a sudden he won't know who Pete Hegseth is. Within the Pentagon, what I have been told from multiple people over and over and over this week is that at the end of the day, if Donald Trump has faith in Pete Hegseth, the people that work for Pete Hegseth don't have a lot of faith in him. And I think that is something that's really important that is being lost kind of in the conversation, is that when you have people in the Pentagon who are leaking to reporters who do not want to, they're very hard to get close to, they're very hard to get chatting, when they are leaking against their boss, that's when you know that things are bad in the Pentagon. How long it takes for Donald Trump to kind of get sick of that, it's anyone's guess at this point.
All right, a real watch this space moment. Eugene Daniels, thank you so much for those insights. And please be sure to check out Eugene, who is one of the new co-hosts of MSNBC's The Weekend, which starts tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. Eastern. Still ahead, how Trump's tariff war threatens Christmas toys and dim the excitement of 4th of July fireworks. But first, the leaders on the front lines of the Trump resistance. Arizona's Democratic Attorney General joins me live after this quick break. President Trump's agenda has faced a litany of legal challenges in the courts. In the first 100 days of the second Trump presidency, at least 220 lawsuits were filed, which means that Trump and his administration have faced an average of more than 2 lawsuits per day. The lawsuits concern almost every aspect of the administration's agenda, from the dismissal of thousands of federal workers to the sweeping changes in immigration and deportation policies. Some of these lawsuits have been filed by Democratic attorneys general, who are at the forefront of the resistance to the administration's extreme agenda. Joining me now to discuss is Arizona Attorney General Kris Mayes. Her state is a party to over a dozen lawsuits against the administration. Welcome, Attorney General Mayes. Can I get your thoughts on the first 100 days of this second Trump term?
Hi, Melissa. Well, boy, it has been a lawless first 100 days. It has been the most unconstitutional, lawless first 100 days of any presidency in the history of our country, which is why we have seen so many lawsuits filed, and why the 23 Democratic attorneys general of this country have now filed at least 14 lawsuits to try to stop it. So it is extraordinary. It's unacceptable, and we're going to continue to do what we're doing until it stops.
But let's drill down into some of these lawsuits that you've joined with other states against the administration. Arizona is currently a litigant in a lawsuit against the administration's efforts to cut funding to AmeriCorps. You were also part of a lawsuit that is challenging the tariff policy on the grounds that it is, quote, subject to Trump's whims rather than the sound exercise of lawful authority. Can you help explain the state's interests here? I think most people understand that these are federal programs, federal policies, but as you explain in the complaint, the states and their constituents have a real interest here too.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you know, as the top law enforcement officers of our states and legal officers of our states, it's our responsibility to uphold the rule of law, to uphold the Constitution, and to defend our states and to prevent injury to our states by the federal government. And we have seen that time and time again from Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and DOJ as they try to slash and burn their way through federal agencies. The tariffs case is a good example. The federal funding freeze was another, where they would have cut hundreds of millions of dollars away from the state of Arizona and harmed our states. We're talking about Head Start, Meals on Wheels. They even would have cut our efforts to try to combat the Mexican drug cartels. So this is about, protecting our states. And I will say the ROI, the return on investment of these lawsuits has been huge, as we have been able to prevent that damage, or at least a lot of it, from happening to our states.
So, Attorney General Mayes, you've noted that the states are big players here, too, in our federated system. We also have a tripartite system in the federal government where we have the courts, the legislature, and the executive, and they're all supposed to check each other, and the states are also checks on them. But right now, we have a Congress that is pretty much on the couch, and we have the courts really stepping in and the states stepping in through the courts. But how long can this continue? Is it going to be possible to challenge this administration solely in the courts, or do we need Congress, the first branch, to step in?
I mean, it's a great question, Melissa, and I will tell you, it's something that the AGs talk about a lot. We are committed to continuing to sue Donald Trump and Elon Musk and DOJ every single time they violate the Constitution. But you make a great point, which is almost every single one of these lawsuits is basically predicated on a violation of the separation of powers, and we are essentially defending the prerogatives of Congress. And Congress is nowhere to be found. They are AWOL in this fight so far. So it would be very good, obviously preferable, if Congress would step up, do its job, and protect its own branch of government. And then in doing so, it would be protecting the states and our citizens against the incredible harm that is being perpetrated on us and on this country. We do not have kings in this country. We do not have kings. We have three branches of government. We have a democracy, and the Democratic AGs are committed to protecting it no matter what.
All right, we'll leave it there. Attorney General Kris Mayes, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Melissa.
Up next, why Trump's tariffs could be putting your 4th of July fireworks in jeopardy this year. That's after this quick break. Donald Trump's tariffs on China went into full effect today after closing a key loophole that allowed less expensive items to enter the country without tariffs. And major retailers are already bracing for impact, indicating that they will have to raise prices. This includes some of the most recognizable brands in the country. Just about 2 months out from the 4th of July, Donald Trump's Liberation Day, tariffs appear likely to affect our Independence Day celebrations. The tariffs are likely to raise prices and limit the supply of fireworks. Plus, major retailers are already predicting toy shortages as far out as the holiday shopping season. Trump himself addressed the issue in his cabinet meeting earlier this week.
Somebody said, oh, the shelves are going to be open. Well, maybe the children will have $2 instead of $30, you know? And maybe the $2 will cost a couple of bucks more than they would normally.
Now, to be very clear, that is not exactly the message Donald Trump, the candidate, was pushing during the 2024 campaign. And it's not what some of his constituents were expecting. Just check out what this little girl told our own Shaquille Brewster at a Trump rally last September.
What do you want him to do? What do you want him to say today?
I want him to lower prices and lower the taxes and make Barbies cheaper.
Make Barbie cheaper. Joining me now to discuss is Daniel Hornung, who is the Deputy Director of the National Economic Council under the Biden administration. Daniel, the president claims that tariffs will not increase prices, yet many companies say that they are going to be passing on the impact of the tariffs to the consumers in the form of higher prices. So who's right here?
Well, Melissa, it's good to be with you. You know, there really isn't much of a question. I think it's very clear. You could debate exactly how much prices will go up, but there's no doubt that when you impose a tax on the item when it comes into the country, that the consumer is going to pay something more. So when you look at whether it's toys or fireworks, as you mentioned, or appliances, clothes, whatever it is, we're going to see very shortly prices going up for consumers. And of course, when you take a step back and think about the economy generally, the thing that you worry about is those price increases mean that people's pay doesn't go as far, and it means they're able to spend less in the economy. That then leads employers to lay off workers, to hire less. And so really the question is that dynamic going to happen before President Trump decides to pull back some of these tariffs? Only he knows, but really that's the only way to avoid the kind of labor market weakening and unfortunately a recession that many folks are worried about.
Do you think it's likely that consumers are really going to feel the effects of the tariffs and the concomitant rise in prices in places like the Christmas holidays or even the 4th of July? And will that be the moment where it really sinks in?
I do think people will feel that their prices are higher. I mean, we've just lived through a period where the main national economic challenge we all faced was high prices, and we just had an election about that. And so it's very hard for me to see President Trump succeeding in somehow convincing people that it's okay that their prices have gone up. When you think in particular about low income, middle income folks around the country, it's a big deal when their prices go up even by a few percentage points. So it's hard for me to imagine a scenario where this doesn't become an issue that he has to really think hard about reversing the tariffs that he's put in place.
So this week, the president noted that Americans might have to cut back a little, maybe buy 2 dolls instead of 30, and the dolls might be a little more expensive than they've been in the past. And the New York Post, usually a pretty Trump-forward outlet, had a headline cover that read, "Skimp on the Barbie." Great headline. How does the promise to lower inflation that Donald Trump made incessantly on the campaign trail square with his ongoing obsession with tariffs?
Well, it doesn't square very well, Melissa. And, it's not very complicated. It seems in the clip you played earlier, there's this idea that we should just buy less or buy more expensive stuff. The reason that people tend to buy cheap things is because they don't make enough money to buy expensive things. And so when you say to them, you have to buy more expensive stuff or you have to buy less, economists would say that's how living standards go down. And Donald Trump really did run on boosting the living standards of middle income families, low income families. And if this goes forward, as it now seems it will, this will do the opposite of that.
Really quickly, to that point, the administration is calling for Congress to do 23% cuts in non-defense spending, which will have a real impact on other programs like the ones you were mentioning. How's that going to translate with the public?
Well, this is, I think, the most economically senseless two-step you could really imagine. It's cause a recession with your tariffs, and then after that happens, cut the programs that vulnerable people most need in recessions, in downturns. So we see it with the steps that the administration and congressional Republicans are trying to take on Capitol Hill to kick millions of families off of Medicaid and food assistance. We see it in the budget proposal that you just mentioned, where they do things like completely eliminate the program that helps low-income families afford their heat in the winter. So this is, I think, economically senseless and really just unfair from a political perspective as well.
All right, Daniel Hornung, thank you so much. That does it for me.